I invite you to journey with me through the fascinating history of the Black African Arab Fung Sultanate. In the early 16th century, a powerful Islamic state emerged in what is now Sudan, shaping the course of African history for centuries to come. This is the story of the Kingdom of Sennar, a realm where armored elephants and musket-wielding warriors fought side by side, and where Islamic culture flourished in the heart of Africa. The Fung Sultanate was founded around 1504 by Amara Dunkas, a black African Arab leader who established dominance in the region. Dunkas laid the foundation for what would become a significant Islamic center in Africa, ruling until 1533. As we turn our attention to the subsequent rulers, we find Abd al-Qadir first, who reigned briefly from 1557 to 1558, but made a lasting impact by consolidating Fung power and expanding its territories. The zenith of Fung power came during the reign of Bardi II from 1645 to 1681. It was under his rule that the Sultanate reached its greatest extent, with significant military campaigns extending the Fung influence across vast swathes of territory. One notable battle during this period was the conquest of Fazugli, a gold-producing region that greatly increased the Sultanate's wealth and power. Bardi II's reign marked a golden age for the Sultanate, cementing its position as a formidable force in the region. The battlefield was transformed by the Fung's innovative military tactics and weaponry. At the heart of their military might stood the armored African bush war elephants, a sight that struck fear into the hearts of their enemies. These massive beasts, protected by armor, provided both offensive power and a psychological edge in battle. But the Fung didn't stop there. They embraced the latest in warfare technology, incorporating firearms into their arsenal. Black Nubian Arab Muslim warriors wielding muskets became a common sight in Fung armies. In a remarkable combination of old and new, some accounts suggest that these musketeers operated from atop the armored war elephants, creating a mobile and deadly fighting force. The Fung also developed unique artillery, including cannons reportedly made from elephant bones wrapped in iron bands. These weapons produced a distinctive and intimidating sound when fired, adding to the psychological warfare employed by the Sultanate. The Fung Sultanate's influence extended far beyond the battlefield. Its capital, Sennar, became a hub of Islamic learning, culture and commerce. The Sultanate facilitated trade across the Sahara and along the Nile, contributing to its wealth and the spread of Islamic culture throughout the region. This cultural and economic flourishing left an indelible mark on the history of Northeast Africa. However, like many great powers, the Fung Sultanate eventually faced decline. Internal conflicts and external pressures took their toll, culminating in the coup of 1762, which significantly weakened the Sultanate's power. The coup, led by Regent Abu Likayik, marked the beginning of a period known as the Age of the Hamaj, where real power shifted away from the Fung monarchy. Despite this, the legacy of the Fung endured, shaping the cultural and religious landscape of Sudan and beyond. As we conclude our journey through the history of the Fung Sultanate, we are left with a vivid picture of a powerful African kingdom that combined military might with cultural sophistication. From the thundering charge of armored elephants to the quiet halls of Islamic learning, the Fung left an enduring legacy. Their story reminds us of the complex and fascinating history of Africa, inviting us to look beyond conventional narratives and explore the rich diversity of human civilization.
Between 700 and 1200 AD, Mercuria was more empire than kingdom. It was organized into 13 major states with a sub-king over each and the king of kings over all. The traditional African council was the final authority, no matter how powerful the king might seem to be. The great and powerful parasol of the king of kings had to be wider than those of the divisional kings, and theirs were larger than any lesser officials. Syracuse, the king of kings in 745, when Omar, the governor of Egypt, stepped up the persecution of Christians in Egypt in what amounted to a Muslim holy war, destroying churches and converting them into mosques, and even putting the patriarch in prison. Since the patriarch in Egypt was the head of all Christian churches in Africa, the Africans regarded this latest onslaught against the churches as an insult, as well as a breach of the peace treaty, now almost 100 years old. Strangely, the Muslim-made Lower Egypt the area of greatest church destruction. When the arrogant Omar ignored all protests and pleas, the African king headed an army of 100,000 men and marched on the Arab center of power in Lower Egypt. The governor of Egypt quickly freed the patriarch and promised to leave the Christians and their churches alone. Syracuse accepted these assurances and withdrew his army from Egypt. It was during this period that an extensive body of church literature developed in the African language, and the remarkable poetry the remarkable poetry industries were expanded. Painting, like writing, were stimulated by the church, just as had been the case in temple art. Mining was a principal source of wealth, but agriculture was the basic national activity, and there was evidence of the people's battles with encroaching deserts. They followed the system of the Mother Empire and overcame certain arid areas by developing the system of terrace farming that was irrigated by water wheels constructed from high places. They were successful enough to produce a surplus of agriculture commodities for export trade. Cotton had been produced from ancient times, and cloth making and other weaving arts were among the oldest crafts. The glass were made in certain, but the extent of the enterprise is not indicated by the archaeological findings. The reports of Arab scholars on the cities of the blacks during the early centuries are significant for two important reasons. The first is that, like the European explorers, geographers, and others referred to earlier, they were not concerned with writing African history, and nothing could be further from their intentions than glorifying the achievements of the blacks. But their mission was to make factual reports of the conditions and exploitable possibilities of Africa to their home countries. Such reports would be the basis for future penetration, exploitation, and conquest. The second highly significant fact about the accounts of Bu Salih and Ibn Salim and other scholars between the 7th and 5th centuries AD is that, unlike the case of Egypt, none questioned neither the greatness or the origin of this black civilization. It was clearly all African that it did not seem to occur to these Arab writers that any other position was tenable. Those familiar with the traditional African religion might question whether Christianity was in fact external to Africa. In any case, the beautiful churches they saw spread over the land of the blacks had become almost completely Africanized for those gods. Welcome back, welcome back, welcome back. Happy Monday. Welcome back to On the Shoulders of Giants. I am Joseph Ward, continuing my reading of Chancellor Williams' book, The Destruction of Black Civilization. And I picked up at the bottom of page 156 where it says Black Makuria. And we're reading about some of the last stands of these all black empires against Arab invasions, starting with Makuria, and then we're going to move on to the Fung, and looking at the Fung and the impact that the Fung had. As you can see in the video, that's why I started with that. I'm just now learning about the Fung, so I decided to share that information with you all, and we'll go further into the Fung and who they were, because this video hinted on some of the things, but according to Chancellor Williams, these people have not just Arab origins, but African origins as well. So we're going to get deep into that. But the further destruction of these black lands and these black kingdoms, but also these black leaders of these black kingdoms and these black empires really still not learning their lessons, but nevertheless also learning about the resilience of African people. That's one of the best things, or the most one of the things that stand out about African people is our continued resilience. That's one of our superpowers. You know, on this channel, especially on our Friday breakdowns, we talk about the superpowers of black people, and one of those superpowers being our resilience, able to bounce back and being able to rebuild. But We have that ability to bounce back and rebuild, which we've seen to loss, I guess, the will to use that ability, especially in modern times. Because remember, we're reading this information, we're reading this history to help impact and improve where we are right now and see where we're going wrong and what we're doing to improve our processes right now. So let's go ahead and jump back into it. I am on page 158, the second paragraph. The prosperity the Arab visitors reported. The magnificent stone and brick palaces, temples, churches, cathedrals, wide avenues lined with palm trees, government buildings, public baths, water supply systems, beautiful gardens, countless craft industries, huge farms with extensive pastures where camels, horses, oxen, cows, sheep, goats, and pigs could be seen grazing lazily. All this was reported as messages with an unwritten message, such as this Black Paradise Brothers of Islam come. So, hey, it's nice over here. So we might want to come take this because there's a lot of prosperity that we can gain from this. The prosperity in this center of the Black world represented one of the last great epochs of the history of the Blacks. If near the final, it was also one of their finest hours on the stage of human progress. Here, the measure of a people's genius could be taken without speculation. Here, the message of who Blacks are was wrought in stone and iron for the succeeding generations of Blacks who were to lose their very identity in blood and tears of unbroken oppression. So these last vestiges of African greatness to fight against the Arab and the Islamic invasion, because at this time, you have Arab invasion, but you also have Islamic invasions as well. So the Arab scholars were properly amazed at a way of life so superior to that of their own homeland. It was something to be amazed about, for there were not only public baths, but public latrines, drainage, and central water systems. But the most remarkable evidence of prosperity and progress was reflected in the advanced standard of living amongst the masses. The massive brick making industry had led to homes of brick and stone in cities, towns, and villages, brick houses and larger houses for the great common people. In the 8th century, this was something for the visiting Arab scholars to write about. It would be something to write about anywhere in the last part of the 20th century. Now we're talking about modern advancements and modern ways of living and modern technology, things that we use today that we in the West believe that we invented and nobody else in the world was doing, where we can see now that even among some of these falling and rebuilt African states along the Nile, that they had these modern technologies and the modern, I guess you could say, things that make our lives more comfortable. The bathrooms, running water, being able to dispose of waste, paved roads, being able to have your roads lit. What's fascinating, what I love about learning history, especially our history, is it gives us more ammunition to dispel the myths, right? But it gives us more ammunition to see that the greatness that our ancestors had is also within us. And the duty of the white supremacists was to make us forget who we are, make us forget how great we are, make us forget what we are capable of, right? And that's why they spent so many hundreds of years breaking us mentally, breaking us physically, breaking us psychologically, just implanting the inferiority complex within us so we won't rise and recognize our greatness. But I'm here to remind you through this channel and through all the information that I give on this channel and through the countless videos and all the words that I give and all the passion that I put into this, we must rise. We must shake off this program and shake off this spell that has been put upon us, this Negro mindset, shake this off and rise as a people and reign again, become powerful again. Now we're talking about the Arab hordes. However, they really did not need to report all this so well. It was already generally known. The treaty barring Arab settlement in the all-Black countries had been ignored from the beginning and certainly treated as non-existing after the death of Calidoses. Now, a point that I want to make on this, what I just read, and I'm going to read it again. However, they really did not need to report all this so well. It was already generally known. The treaty barring Arab settlement in the all-black countries had been ignored from the beginning and certainly treated as non-existing after the death of Calidoses, right? All the history that I've told on this channel, one of the things that the common themes that I see, especially African people dealing with outsiders, invaders, even other people who don't have their best interests, even African people who may not have their best interest, is they do not honor treaties. If they see you as weak, if you have something that they want, they will be relentless to get it. And the treaty is just a red herring that can be used to distract you while they're going for the gusto. Do not trust people. Do not try to do business or make deals with your enemies. The Arab came in steadily streams year after year, but in an inch by inch system over widely scattered areas that appeared not to cause immediate concern. But they came in unchecked and alarming waves when the great schisms in Islam led to bloody wars in the Arab world. Does that sound familiar? The character of the refugee movements out of Arabia and other Arab centers of power depended on what sect had captured the caliphate. Let the record show, therefore, that all the Arabs that swarmed into Africa across the Red Sea and Indian Oceans were not bent on either conquest or domination, right? Just like modern times. All of the refugees and all of the illegal immigrants coming into America are not bad and malicious people, but we do know, and we've seen that they're being used against us and to replace us, right? So countless thousands were fleeing there for refuge, fleeing for their very lives, right? Just like here in America, modern day times. Once settled there, however, they formed the ever-increasing population base for the Muslim leaders whose aim was to establish Islamic rule over the world, over the whole Black world, right? So in our case, they're being brought in to replace us and further knock us down in the ranking of groups. And so we will be 4th to 5th class citizens. Bring in all these foreign groups, give these foreign groups resources, give these foreign groups position, allow them to flourish, and they will replace us. We're being actively replaced and actively reduced in our importance and significance here in America. And we're allowing it to happen because we're sitting on the sidelines. It happened to our ancestors, and it can damn sure happen to us. They were to follow the Christian strategy of concentrating on the conversion of African kings and leaders in the belief that as the king goes, so goes the nation. A theory that did not work in Africa except in a superficial way for expediency. However, the Black kings were already dropping off their African names for Christian names, the first steps towards self-effacement. Have them change their names and take on our names. Even now in America, right? I would see a lot of times that when people are converting from Christianity, they will take on either an African name or an Arab name. And, you know, like Dr. Clark reminding us, taking on an Arab name, and as we're reading, is also taking on the name of just another slave master. You went from one slave name to the next slave name. So as early as the 9th century, specifically 831 AD, King Zachariah, alarmed at greatest incursions of Arabs into the Sudan, sent a delegation headed by his nephew, the heir to the throne, to the Caliph at Baghdad, asking that the Treaty of 652 be respected by the Arab migrations halted. This meant that a weak Black king now held the destiny of the race in his hands. That he was so naive as to suppose that the Caliph could stop the Arab hordes, even if he declared to do so, it was itself a sign of incompetence, because he did not understand this was going to happen whether you wanted to or not, whether anybody wanted to. This was happening. They were coming in and they were taking over slowly and surely. The highest ranking of the 13 kings under the King of Kings was the Eparch of Faris, Lord of the Mountain. He was the commander of the frontier forces at the Egyptian border, and his special mission was to bar Arab migration and settlement in the land of the blacks. Only the limited number of traders were permitted to pass, and the time limited for their stay was fixed. The eparch, therefore, had intended been the most important official next to the king of the kings, for he was directly responsible for the security and independence of the nation. Under strong kings and strong eparchs, the mission was carried out, and Arab incursions, Arab incursions southward were checked. That was now long ago. The Arabs had been passing the Lord of the Mountain and his garrisons for so many decades that by the 9th century, Arabic was being generally spoken below the First Cataract. Hey, you keep allowing them to come in, just like they did with the Hyksos, just like they did with the Hittites and all other groups that continue to come in. You allow them to continue to come in, even though they are not a threat. You're still allowing them to come in. Don't let nobody into your stuff. The Wakandans had a bit of a point, not allowing people to know where you are and allowing them into your space, into your country, into your area, right? The Wakandans had a point. So now we're going to how slavery came to confide to the blacks alone. So basically how the blacks became the main group of people to be enslaved, no longer other groups, because other groups fight back a bit better, which is crazy. So in the latter part of the 13th century, David, king of Mercuria, seeing no other way to forestall Arab occupation for a century, stepped up his raids in Upper Egypt. The raids were easier to carry out because the chaos that followed the triumphs of the Mamalukes in Egypt. But in 1272, the blacks, in what I have attacked as the pattern of their own self-destruction, made the first major step to that end. The usual impatience of heirs to the throne in achieving that goal soon enough found full expression in Shikandu, the king's nephew. He hastened to the Sultan of Egypt to secure an alliance and invasion of his country that would assure his ascendancy to the throne. The Sultan had every reason to grasp this wonderful opportunity handed to him by blacks themselves, not only to even score with them, but also to create more certain conditions for Mameluke hegemony over the lands, trying to be friends with people you don't need to be friends with, making alliances with people that don't have your best interests. Moreover, the African king had not only been raiding Egypt with impunity, but he had denounced the Treaty of 652 and refused to pay the Bakt, the Sultan Baybars, therefore did not hesitate. He organized a strong invading expedition with Shikandu at its head and entered the Black Land. The struggle was long and bitter, as the Sultan's strategy in using his black army along with Shikandu's own followers made it appear to be civil war between blacks. In the end, the Sultan won through the black heir to the throne and allowed him to be crowned king as his protege. The dismemberment of the black kingdoms in the Sudan had begun. The dismemberment of the kingdoms in the Black Sudan had begun. Now a rival tribute was exacted and almost doubled without any pretense of being an agreement of mutual exchange. The tribute exacted was harsh, and the blacks were promised nothing. The kingdom was thus divided into two parts, the Sultan taking the northern region and his personal fief. Muslim rule now extended over Egypt into the Sudan. The pattern was set that was to continue into our times and probably beyond. The Arabs in the northern Sudan, while the blacks were pressured into smaller and smaller areas in the southern Sudan. And yeah, it's still continuing. They still have control over that area. So it should be noted here that the Mameluke rulers' effective power was confined to Lower Egypt, and that independent Arab tribes, of which the Bani Khans was the most powerful, held all Upper Egypt. They were only nominally under the sultans. In order to put an end to the endless coups and counter coups among the blacks, the decision was reached to overwhelm the south with united armies from both Upper and Lower Egypt and step up the Islamatization of blacks, putting Muslim kings on the throne. Every tactic that they could use, they're using. Every strategy, every inch that they can take, they took and 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 they took, because they understood that in the South, that's where all the real riches is. This is what's going to take us to the next level and put us on another level and give us another form of wealth, give us another form of power. Wealth, land, power, and resources were in the South in abundance, and they wanted it, and they was going to do anything to get it. And now it is happening. Because remember, in the past, it was conquest just above the first cataract. Now that they're encroaching below the first cataract, beyond the second, third, and fourth cataract, deep, deep, deep into the Black lands. So now things will change into what it is today. So when you go to the Sudan and you go to these areas, it looks like the Arabs have already were there from the beginning. They've always been there, and that's not the case. So in 1316, the objectives were realized when Dongola was again raised for the 5th time, and Karimbes, the last Black Christian king, was put to flight. A Black Muslim, Abdullah, was made king temporarily while awaiting the pleasure of the Sultan, but of the powerful chief Khans, Al-Dawala, and the Banzi Khans Arab tribe. His pleasure was to put the Black Muslim king to death and assume the kingship over the Blacks himself. Over the Blacks? This statement is misleading. This was no longer the land of the Blacks. White and colored Arabs now constituted the majority without this population base. The triumph of the Arabs in the Sudan could not have happened. So there you have it. There you have it. It was that by this time, it was too many onslaughts, too many continuous onslaughts, war after war after war after war. Not just the wars, but the friendly encroachment. Them coming in coming in as refugees, coming in peace, right? Not looking to conquer anything, but still subject to fall to the ideologies of the Arabs when they come in. So now we're gonna move back to the Mamalukes, because remember, reading this section, we're talking about the changing of slavery forever. So this is where the Mamalukes come in to help us see how the change in slavery happened at this point in time and made African people the main focus of slavery in the world. Because yes, we realize that many groups of people face slavery, but not many groups of people faced continuous slavery like the Blacks did, right? From various groups of people, right? Yes, we know the Koreans have one of the longest stretches of slavery in history, but we're focusing specifically on us and what happened to us that led to our places in the world to where we are today. So the Mamalukes were the whites who had been enslaved by the Arabs in their wild and amazing sweep of their desert homeland to conquer all adjacent countries and establish the world empire with a speed that shocked the world. Theirs was the original blitz, the enslavement of prisoners of war, which was the way the general slavery began, was the order of the day. Race had no bearing on the matter then. Whites, blacks, browns, and yellows were all made slaves if captured. The Arabs also made a practice of creating strong slave armies. The white slave armies were the Mamalukes. These men stationed in Egypt revolted, overthrew the government, established their own line of ruling sultans. For this, they were hated by the Arabs and looked upon with scorn. Even though they had been converted to Islam, the white ex-slaves hated their former masters even more. This white slave revolt and its historical significance are underplayed. Yet its impact was such that it influenced the course of modern history and black-white relations. The effect of that revolt on the black world was tragic. For the murderous onslaught of the white slaves against their erstwhile masters so shocked the white world that the general enslavement of whites ended forever. Not the total enslavement of whites ended forever, but it's talking about the general enslavement, because white groups were still subject to enslavement after that, but it changed the total ideology from enslavement to total control to just, more so on the lines of indentured servitude, right? On this, the record is clear. White slavery ended after the Mamaluk Rebellion. Thereafter, Black Africa became the exclusive hunting ground for slaves, a situation made easy by the developments outlined in this work. All of the theories of inherent Black inferiority stem from the urgently felt need to justify the success and confining slavery to the African race. If we really want to be honest, if we're really being honest, it was easier to conquer African people at this point. Africa had been weakened. The strongholds in Africa had been weakened. It's easier to conquer these people who are subjected to onslaught after onslaught after onslaught than to try to go to people who are more apt to fight back, who have more of a fighting spirit, who have not been subjected to the centuries, the thousands of years of just invasions and just being moved from place to place, having to pick up and move again, rebuild, right? Now, because we're talking about people who are pretty much on their last legs. There's still African people on this land, but as a power base among their last legs against the Arab incursions, right? The answer to the riddle of the centuries can be traced right here. For the great change in human history, when only Blacks were enslaved, led to the general degradation of a whole people. The way was now both open and easy for all the relevant branches of science and scholarship to proclaim theories on the inherent inferiority of Blacks. For worse than this, since Black populations were everywhere under white control, they could actually be forced into inferiority by a dehumanizing program silently structured in all institutions and phases of white national life. The Blacks are the immediate victims of those diseases born of poverty and plant deprivation, undernourished and diseased mothers carrying and bringing into the world babies who are both physically and mentally handicapped even before birth. Among the many other outcomes from confining slavery to the African race that will be stated at this point was making the very word Black something evil, undesirable, or just plain bad luck whenever applied. Sound familiar? Does it sound familiar? The conditions that African people were living in at that time are similar to conditions African people had to live in America: undernourished, diseased, born in poverty, plant deprivation, diseased mothers carrying and bringing babies into the world with mental and physical handicaps, all of the disparities and the disadvantages, the dehumanization. Imagine being born and not even considered a human being, but having to fight, having the will to fight for your humanity anyway. The Mamaluk Sultan sent another expedition in 1323 to put the African king Karembes on the throne again after his brother disposed of the Arab king and himself died a few days later. The coups and counter coups still seem to be endless and not at all the presupposed political phenomena characteristically confined to the Blacks. Therefore, as soon as the Mamaluk forces withdrew from the south, Khan's Alwa returned, overthrew Karembes a second time, and became king again. Meanwhile, another strong Arab tribe, I'm gonna mess this name up, the Guyanyan, the Guhanyan, the Guhayna. Okay, I'm gonna go with that. The Guhayna. I'm saying it wrong, but I told you. Meanwhile, another strong African tribe, the Guhayna, had been pouring into the Sudan in such great waves that they rapidly became the dominant Arab group below the second cataract. And remember what I just said, they became the second dominant Arab group below the second cataract. That means that they are moving further south. The kingdom known to historically as Makuria was no more. It was the kingdom that, together with its more southern neighbor, battled to maintain and expand the glorious civilization of the motherland for another 1,000 years after the fall of the imperial city of Meroe. That was why it was close to the 15th century before Ibn Khaldun or anyone else could report that the Gunhanian Arabs were the complete masters of the land of the blacks from the first cataract to the highlands of Abyssinia. The history of Black Egypt had been repeated in the Black South. The coming of the Caucasian, whether from Asia or Europe, or whether in the name of peace, trade, or integrated society, or in the name of Allah, of the Arabs, of the God of Jesus Christ, of the Jews and Christians. No matter under what pretext they came, it meant the destruction of the highly advanced civilization of the blacks and their total degradation as a people. The same ethnic phenomenon that accelerated the process of racial disintegration in Egypt also operated in the Sudan. This was simply stated the widespread sexual activities on the part of the Arab men and black slave girls, the outcome of which was a new breed of Afro-Arabs, the same sexual process that produced Egyptians as a nationality group, neither Asian nor African. And last I checked, we do have a large population of mixed race babies that are born in America, and they don't have black fathers. History been repeating itself, and we didn't know it because we don't know our history. In the Sudan, Arabization and Islamization had another outcome. Not only did the Afro-Arabs consider themselves Arabs and bitterly resonated being called Sudanese or black, but thousands of the jet black unmixed Africans insisted on being classed as Arabs. They still do. This fact was settled beyond question during my field studies in the Sudan in 1964. This fact also confuses and frustrates the black world both in and outside of Africa. For who now are our African brothers? As of right now, we don't really even know who our African brothers and sisters are because of the diaspora wars. With the capture and control of the biggest remaining kingdom of the Ethiopian Empire completed through the peaceful infiltration and waves of Arab refugees converting centuries of the triumphant Arabs were not disposed to follow the same long drawn out procedure in taking over the last key kingdom of the formerly Black Empire. That was Alwa. The Arabs decided on a full-scale war against the last citadel of Black power in the southern Sudan. Although Mercuria was most in the spotlight of the wars against the Arab incursions, she was aptly supported by Alwa. Mercuria had to carry the brunt of the burden because it was right next door to the enemy, and it alone was the awesome responsibility of holding the floodgates above the first cataract through which the Arabs' tides ebbed and flowed. Meanwhile, Alwa, with ruins of the imperial cities of Napata and Meroe in its very midst, had a more direct responsibility of restoring and maintaining the glories of a Black civilization that had refused to die with the fall of the Ethiopian Empire 1,000 years before. So Alwa had replaced Meroe with its beautiful capital city of Soba, and had developed its other towns and cities along such advanced lines that foreign writers never failed to comment on the agricultural designs, the wide streets lined with palm trees, the spacious homes, and in fact, all of the things they had observed in Mercuria. The thriving industrial crafts, large-scale cattle raising, a surplus-producing agriculture that kept alive an export trade in dates, wheat, and Gary cotton fabrics and other produce not easily perishable, and an efficient administration, a strong army headed by formidable cavalry regiments. Alwa had made its defense systems more secure by maintaining more walled towns and cities than Mercuria. These walled places were rebuilt primarily as centers of refuge against the constant Arab slave raids. Now they were to serve as freedom's final bastion of defense against local enslavement. Alwa was ready for what everyone knew was its last war as a nation. For the Arabs had formed a great confederation of its feuding tribes. These, while perpetually at war among themselves, could always be counted on to unite quickly against non-Arab and non-Muslim peoples. Only if we could do that. Only if Black people throughout the world could learn to unite against our enemies. But we first have to be able to recognize who our enemies is, or who our enemies are, because as of right now, we see ourselves as our greatest enemies, even though we know who our greatest enemies are, but we see ourselves as our greatest enemies. Before the United Arab Armies entered Alwa, the Black leadership had ordered a general evacuation of the country by all women, children, and the aged. The men, warriors, all remained to face the foe. It was not known whether the traditional Black Women's Army Corps existed in Alwa. In any event, the Arabs did not find, and indeed did not expect, the conquest to be easy. They knew well the courage of the Blacks in battle and their willingness to surrender even when defeated. So they had to take Alwa city by city, town by town, village by village, hill by hill, bush by bush. The Blacks had built a high order of life that they were fighting and dying for. This they did nobly on the plains of Alwa in 1504, while their people, some never to be seen again, joined other countless thousands in the great migration toward East, West, Central, and Southern Africa. The last stand, this was their last stand, the last conquest, the last time to fight against the Arabs, one of the last bastions of hope for the Black empires along the Nile. So basically, Alwa fell. And it seemed like it was over. But then the Fung emerged as the surprise kingdom. During the same period, these two Black states were being destroyed. The history of the rebirth of destroyed African states was being repeated just beyond their borders by migrating Africans who had decided to make another stand in the very midst of death and danger. These Blacks were called the Fung people. They gathered in strength and with consummate daring quickly formed a new nation, and the very year Alwa passed from the scene as a state. Under the leadership of the strong king general and statesman Amara Dunkwas, they established their capital at Sanaa on the Blue Nile, and at the very outset, they assumed an aggressive stance that put the world on notice that the Black power in Africa had not yet been completely destroyed, and that another fighting state had emerged from the ashes of those that had just been destroyed. Indeed, the Fung state arose with the suddenness that proceeded with policies and programs so daring that it shocked both the Arabs and the now encroaching Ottoman Turks. The latter, after overthrowing the Mamaluk rule and taking over Egypt, quickly built and expanded defensive fortifications against possible Fung invasions. For these Blacks had turned the tables of history by annexing and bringing under control the Arab tribal states in the lower Gezra region and the areas around the present Khartoum. The Fung king appointed an Arab as his governor over Arab provinces, emphasizing the Arab status of tributary vassals by giving their office of governor an African title. All this proved to be just too much for our Western historians. Characteristically, and even today, they refer to the Fung as a mysterious people, and I can attest to that because I've been looking up information on the Fung, and that they talk about them being a mysterious people. But this one document that I found is talking about the Fung being referred to as mysterious people, but African scholars saying, no, we have information to prove that these are African people. So the Fung, as a mysterious people, wonder from whence they came, and the debate with the casual air of deep scholarship whether or not these Blacks of the Fung kingdom were really Blacks. When it is suggested that they probably came from the East, it is a repeat of the overworked canard that plans the idea that all such people must have come from Asia. In his recent modern history of the Sudan, P.M. Hope concludes that a rigorous investigation of the problem of Fung origins has yet to be made. Why is there a problem, and what is the problem if there is one? Both questions are integral parts of the great issues in this work. They have been rather fully answered in different contexts. As to this particular case, therefore, the problem of Fung origins is the problem for Caucasians only, with the possible exceptions of those Negro scholars whose skewed vision of reality is through eyes of blue People not concerned with the distortions of history, but desire the truth about the past as honestly as it can be determined, will have no difficulty in understanding that the people who were called Fung were one of the uprooted and countless groups we have been describing, driven from one place and reorganizing to settle in another until uprooted again and again, and resettling and rebuilding again and on until the Europeans swept the whole continent and afterward. Some wandered to the outermost parts, as stated over and over, and some, like the Shillooks, who built the Fung kingdom, did not leave their general region. If they came from the east, it was from the east bank of the Nile. And so another group of people who was like, all right, well, they've destroyed our previous empire, but we're going to rebuild, because that's what we do as African people. We don't cower. We don't fall. We don't die. We multiply. And we're going to continue to fight and continue to fight and continue to fight and continue to fight. No matter how long we have to fight, we continue to fight. No matter how long or how hard we have to fight, we continue to fight. Fung or Shilluk traders roamed far and wide in the great game of buying and selling. The continued prosperity of the country depended largely on their selling activities in neighboring states in Egypt and over the all-important caravan trade routes to distant lands. This trade was the forceful stimulus that kept the people at home busy and happy and producing the necessary surplus in agriculture, mining, and in the craft industries of various kinds. Having become Muslims, if only in name, the Fung merchants were readily received everywhere in the increasingly Islamized world in Africa and Asia. The fact that they came from a proud and warlike state may have had more to do with the difference shown them than the fact that they're of being Muslim. Non-Muslim Makuria and Alwa had a most flourishing trade with the Muslim world. Their traders had also been received with respect and honor by the Arabs. It is ironic that one has to be a fighter to command great respect. It is ironic that one has to be a fighter to command great respect. Unlike Makuria and Alwa, the Fung kingdom did not resist Islamization, but welcomed it. Yes, its African nationalism clearly transcended Islam. The number of sultans and notables who rejected Arabic names is impressive and significant. Their open door policies, however, were to speed up the pace of Arabization, not only in the Fung kingdom, but all over the Sudan. And as Arabization spread among the blacks, so did slavery and slave raiding. The Arabs' insatiable and perpetual demands for slaves had long since changed slavery from an institution that signaled a military victory by the number of captured prisoners to an institution that provoked warfare expressively for the enslavement of men, women, and children for sale and resale. So when Europeans say that they didn't start slavery, they didn't make the Africans do all these things, they're right. Slavery in all its forms, except the chattel slavery, slavery in all other forms had happened on the African continent and was happening. What the Europeans did was came in and took advantage of it. And we got to stop. They got to stop acting like they didn't do that, because they used that to fuel the transatlantic slave trade. Human beings had now openly become very profitable articles of trade, and the slave dealers had found shorter routes to quicker riches. The Fung, like many other black states then and since, found added wealth in the slave trade and a new reason for waging war on its neighbors for prisoners of war to further the trade. Today, it is difficult to find even a small region that does not have a history of intertribal conflicts that stemmed directly from one group's raiding another for slaves or trying to either conquer another group, annex it, or enslave the whole society that was overrun. The Fung then is just another example of a role played by the blacks that not only guaranteed their own damnation, but also made their reunification for nationhood or anything else a most difficult undertaking. The difficulty becomes impossible of solution when as soon as the yoke of white oppressors has been removed, the descendants of former black oppressors come forth as the rightful rulers as before, just as though nothing at all had happened to change the overlord status of their proud slave-selling ancestors. The Fung kingdom, because of its Muslim shield and war-making machine, survived as a black state in what otherwise would have been an impossible environment for 300 years. These centuries were characterized by all the ups and downs, internal power struggles, coups and counter-coups, the best other states. Sometimes an Arab dynasty ruled, sometimes it was an Afro-Arab line, and at other times, most often, it was a black dynasty, or what the Arabs called the Hamaji. The end came at the beginning of the 19th century when the Ottoman Turks began their reign of terror in the Sudan with the seizure of Sinnar by Muhammad Ali, the same Muhammad Ali who was the greatest murderer of the blacks that ever set foot on the African continent. His massacre of men and women and children was on such a scale that even the white world protested. So remember when I talked about taking the names of your other oppressors? Because you got to know the full history. We started in the heartland of the race, where its history clearly extended from the Sudan over Egypt. The antiquity of black civilization, the amazing heights it reached before recorded history, the early problems of Asian invasions, amalgamation, and the new breed, the colored Egyptians, Caucasian penetration into royal black lineages, the increasing pressures on the blacks and their southward migrations, the Afro-Asian wars, the blackout of black history in Egypt, the long drawn-out process of Caucasianization of Egypt, as it was de-Africanized, the withdrawal of the Ethiopian border to the first cataract, the concentration of blacks below that line, the confusion of black history through the confusion of names, color, and dynasties, integration and amalgamation as brotherhood myths, the great black migrations, the splitting up of states and languages, and their role in the decline of black African civilization. All these historical factors were set forth before the final collapse of the Ethiopian Empire in the 4th century AD, and before we begin the analysis of the 3 children states that were born as their imperial mother passed, bequeathing to them her own deathless spirit to carry on. The main characteristics of the history of the blacks are reflected in the states, building and advancement systems of life, then having it destroyed, built again, destruction again, migrating and building somewhere else, only to be sought out and destroyed again, moving, always moving, rebuilding and moving again and again, countless thousands giving up the struggle as utterly hopeless, eternal strife increased as external pressures and threats to existence increase. And every man for himself philosophy replaces that of eternal brotherhood in some societies. And through it all, new states were formed, even during the most destructive centuries when death seemed to be a rider on every stream and passing breeze. New states trying to restore yet once again their lost civilization, their written languages, their forgotten arts and sciences, the organization and study of their oral history that had come down unbroken in its main outlines from generation to generation, and the chance to remain on one area long enough to live once again under the African constitutional system that is unrivaled by that of any people. These efforts were still being pushed in every region of the African continent long after the undermining operation had been set in motion to pave the way for the conquest by Europe. The Africans were still rebuilding their own civilization when that of Asia and Europe was imposed. So, unfortunately, talking about the chronicling of the decline of Ethiopia, the last vestiges of Ethiopia that had to convert to Islam and become warlike to be respected. But that's what I keep telling people, though. If you can kick people's butt, you will be respected. If you are a united, codified people, you will be respected. If you are a productive people, you will be respected. If you are a people who can kick butt, united, codified, and productive. People will have no choice but to respect you. You will demand respect. And if anybody get out of line, you can put them in their place. Those are the foundational structures of nation building. So one of the greatest ways we can get out of complaining about our situation is changing our situation. Building for ourselves. Investing in ourselves. Making sure that we pour into ourselves, our communities, build communities, Black people moving next to Black people and coexisting in unity and harmony and love. Making something happen for ourselves that we haven't made happen in a long time. Putting ourselves back at the top where we belong. Not to conquer other people, but to live the way we've lived before we were conquered. So that was chapter 5. So chapter 6 starts on page 171. Chapter 6 is the African construction, birth of democracy. That goes from 171 to, let's see, from 171. I forgot to say this at the beginning, but make sure you like this video, comment, subscribe, share, getting them comments. Let me know what's going on. Talk to me. Make sure other people know about this. Pass this information along. Just keep passing, keep passing, keep passing. So from 171 to 186. So chapter 6 is 171 to 186. Let's make sure I'm saying that correctly. 171 to 186. Make sure you like this video, comment, subscribe, share. Ways to support On the Shoulders of Giants. Myself, Patrick, Professor Carl Tone Jones, is in the description below. If you don't have your copy of Destruction of Black Civilization, there's a link. I have an Amazon affiliate link in the description. You can click. You can get the book, and that you will help support On the Shoulders of Giants. Any support that you give me goes to my Black History School because we are doing our thing. We just met this past Saturday. We had a good time. We're actually, so look out, because I have a video that we're gonna put together. So me and the students in my African History School, we're gonna put together a video for you guys' enjoyment, just to show you some of the things that we're working on and some of the things that we're learning, we're studying in this Black History School. So look out for that. I love you all. Thank you for the support. Let's keep running these numbers up. I'm getting closer and closer and closer to 100,000 subscribers. So please help me get there. And the only way you can do that by hit that subscribe button. Make sure you watch these videos. Tell everybody about it. This Black history is important for us, especially if you're in places like I am in the state of Florida, where they're like, basically Black history is banned from being taught in educational settings, the school systems and everything. So we got to make sure we teach our own. My On the Shoulders of Giants Black History School and this On the Shoulders of Giants platform, this digital platform, YouTube channels, my website, my Instagram, is all designed to make sure that we get the history. My TikTok, all designed to make sure that we get the history that is our history. Not just that we get it and we know this history, we can spout it out, but we've analyzed it, thought about it, broken it down, and we can use this history to better ourselves, because we're bettering it, not necessarily for us, not for us at all, but for 5 generations from now, that they don't have to live as oppressed people. So with that being said, I am Joseph Ward. I love you all, and make sure you catch the next video coming up.